Welcome to Your Story Doesn't End Here, the mental health podcast for military and veterans. I'm your host, Rachel, and my mission with this podcast is to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, bring awareness to mental health issues, and provide value and solutions to help make life more abundant. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming back for another episode of Your Story Doesn't End Here. Today's guest is Beth. Beth is a gay veteran in her 50s. She served in the Army Reserve from 1983 to 1989, in the Navy Reserve from 1998 to 2013. She worked for airlines for 15 years, ending with layoff directly after 9/11. She finished her military career as a chief petty officer. She is married with 2 sons from a former partner. She is 100% permanent and totally disabled from the VA and currently lives in Argentina. Beth, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hey, Rachel, thanks for having me, and hola de Argentina para todos.
Yeah, so I'll let you just get right into sharing your story, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Okay, well, I appreciate you having me, and here we go. So just to start, my high school English teacher had this great piece of advice when we did the section on speeches, the section that everybody dreaded doing. He told us to know your audience. So in getting ready for today, I thought about what kind of audience might appreciate my story. Are you the person who seems to have everything together all the time, but doesn't inside? Are you the superstar EP sailor that the LPO or chiefs give all the work to because it'll be done correctly and quickly? Are you someone who doesn't want to do 20 years in the military and thinks everyone will say you're an idiot? Are you someone who's considered suicide? How about someone who's had a leader do the exact opposite of what they should when you needed help? Or you're a reservist who has an inferiority complex because you've never had any active duty time and you're faking it as well as you can. Well, I'm just here to tell you that I am all of those people. So I hope what I talk about today, I hope it helps. And at the very least, I'm sure it's an interesting story. So I've always been a reservist, and my only active duty time before 9/11, that is, was for basic training and AIT, which is like A school in the Army. I was an Army medic, which the HMs out there, I will not insult you by saying I was just like you. I know corpsmen are much more trained and skilled than Army medics. I was fortunate, however, to enlist in the Naval Reserve in a program called Advanced Pay Grade. And that's where they took my civilian skills and translated them into a Navy rate. I enlisted as a YN3, a yeoman third class. And I was waived from boot camp and A school. I was waived from boot camp because I went to Army boot camp, and I was waived from yeoman A school because I had to learn everything via correspondence course. For me, and this story with all of you, 9/11 begins my descent into mental health issues and crisis. Our second son was born 4 days before 9/11, September 7th, 2001. I worked for US Air for 15 years and was laid off exactly 2 weeks later. My partner, who carried our son, she was a stay-at-home mom. I suddenly was job hunting, which I hadn't had to do in 15 years. And did you know there's this thing called the internet? Have you heard of it? You can job hunt at home in your pajamas at 3 o'clock in the morning. That didn't exist in 1986, the last time I had to job hunt. So I was job hunting, and in the back of my mind, of course, I had 4 people to support. Well, in January 2002, I was hired by Sara Lee Corporation. But on my 5th day of work, that very first Friday, I was notified that I was going to be mobilized to Guantanamo Bay in support of the detainee mission, and I would be deployed for a year. I think it's important to tell you listeners, especially if you're a younger listener, that we were still under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and same-sex marriage was not legal in 2001. Also, I didn't carry our sons, so I couldn't adopt them. So when I was mobilized, the Navy thought I was single with no dependents. I was probably the most perfect mobilization reservist there could be. But I, of course, wasn't. I was in a partnership, long-term partnership with two little children. I had no one to talk to about that or about my home situation. But fortunately, I was mobilized with someone else in my unit, I was a YN2 at that point, and I was mobilized with a guy who was also a YN2, and he actually knew. He was the only person I trusted with this. He was also married with two small children. So thank God I had him, because we certainly had enough in common there. My relationship with my kid's mom was a little tenuous at the time, though. I wasn't in love with her anymore. And even, 21 years later, I feel tremendously guilty saying that out loud, but it's my truth and it's important to the story. I wasn't in love with her anymore as partners. We were incredibly good parents and very caring towards each other. And, she's probably my closest person in my life that wasn't my immediate family. But I was in my 30s and not wanting to be with her anymore just because it was comfortable. I just got to this point where I was saying, I think if you're in love, it shouldn't just be because logistically it's comfortable. So other than my 2 weeks of annual training in the reserves, I had never spent a single day on active duty in the Navy, which compounded my anxiety about being mobilized and sent to Guantanamo Bay, of all places. But fortunately, I was a yeoman and very good in Microsoft Office. So coupled with my airline experience as an analyst, I finagled a job in Guantanamo Bay, not working in the admin pool, but I finagled a job meeting the airplanes and bringing those folks into the Joint Task Force. And they made me basically the statistician for my time that I was in Gitmo. So I worked heavily in Excel and other Microsoft programs, generating reports, et cetera. So then when the members would leave, I would detach them from this statistical report too. I actually joke, Rachel, that I got a Joint Commendation Medal simply because I was the only one there who knew advanced Excel formulas. I really, to this day, it's completely the truth. And I actually laugh every time I look at that medal, but it's our little secret. We won't tell the commanding general to take it back. I assimilated there very easily. And I guess I got in this mindset that if I'm going to be here and it's not voluntary, I've always been kind of a positive person and looking at things like, you just have to make the best of things. It's really the only way to get through things you don't want to do. So I did assimilate there. And thankfully, my family back home was very supportive to my partner and our kids in North Carolina, which is where I lived at the time, if I haven't said that already. However, I did feel some level of danger being in Gitmo and, coupled with the planes crashing on 9/11 and working for an airline. While I was in Gitmo, I developed a very high fear level about airplanes in general. And when I'd hear the plane coming in, and I was the one who met the plane, I would start shaking and my heart would begin racing and I would, almost want to duck thinking they were going to divert and hit me. The smell of jet fuel would terrify me. But oddly, I did love my job because it was basically working for an airline. And so, I just tried to keep in mind that I was very good at what I did. And it was very unlikely that there was going to be planes crashing into us. But it was always in the back of my mind. And, Gitmo, it's kind of like a out there, a target that's right out there. There's no fence or anything. So it scared me most of the time being there. However, I was a shit hot sailor. And that goes back to the beginning where I said, are you one of those people who, you've never been on active duty, but you fake it really well and no one's the wiser? Well, that was me. So, I was kind of the funny person that everybody knew there. And if you know the television show MASH, I was absolutely the Radar O'Reilly character. You need something? Go see that YN2 in the hangar. She's been here longer than everybody and she'll know what to do or how to get something, which was completely the truth. So, I am a people person, so I love that. And plus, I got a ton of mail. And here's the rule. You have to write them to get them. And I did very little else to do but write letters. This was... we had email, but, letters were better. And so I did. I got probably the most mail of anybody when I was there. It became kind of a running joke. But, on a serious note, I don't come from a family of veterans, and not for lack of desire to serve our country, but my family was just born at the opposite time. So, no one in my family was in World War II or Korea or Vietnam, and so literally I was like the first person that people knew personally who was serving on active duty after 9/11. So as most of you know, there was a ton of support, for the troops, which I certainly appreciated. I'd been there about 5 months. I was cooking right along and like, good, I can do this job. I can gut it out for a year. And unfortunately, I started bleeding from one of my nipples. It was just a drop every couple days or so. We had tarantulas and, scorpions and everything that you could possibly be bitten by. So in the beginning, I just didn't really think a lot about it. I'm like, oh, I wonder what that is. Maybe mosquito bite, whatever. But then I realized, of course, it's coming from my nipple. It's probably not a mosquito bite. So after about 2 weeks, I went to the corpsman. Shout out to corpsman, by the way. And they didn't waste any time with me. They put me on a plane to the Naval Hospital in Bethesda to get a mammogram. It was my first mammogram. I was 38 at the time. And I think you need to know that, at the time, the Navy only required mammograms for women who were 40 or over. I think you all know kind of where this story is going. So yes, indeed, I had breast cancer. I had 4 malignant tumors in one breast. So to say it shocked me was the understatement. And no family history of any cancer, basically, in my entire family. So completely a shock. However, always the comedian wannabe. I went back to Gitmo to pack because I had, as I guess they say on that television show, Survivor, I had been voted off the island. As I said, I lived normally in North Carolina, which is about 6 hours away from Bethesda in the Washington, D.C. area. My partner and my 2 sons and my other family, of course, were thrilled that, I was back in the United States and relatively close. And this is where I think my story is a little bit different than certainly most people who have cancer, and perhaps different than those who unfortunately have cancer on active duty. I still had to go through cancer alone in Washington. I didn't go through cancer in my hometown of North Carolina, or I didn't go home to my bed or my dog or my family. So I had to go through it alone in Washington. My younger son didn't recognize me when I went home initially when I transferred. And, every day I just felt like the bond to my family was tearing little by little, being so close, in the United States. But, for the most part, every week I had to stay in Washington. Both my breasts were removed, and I had to wait a week for the pathology report to see if my cancer had spread or not. And so in that week, I have to tell you, Rachel, of all this whole story, that week had to be one of the hardest weeks of my entire life because of the uncertainty. There I was in Washington. I was not going to go home after my 1-year mobilization was up. And you don't know for a week, like, how bad is it? How bad is the cancer? How long am I going to be on active duty? Am I too far gone? What? So that week was horrible. And of course, true to form, the Navy waited exactly 7 days. And so it was certainly not 7 days of fun. But luckily for me, the cancer had not spread. I was in stage 1, which, thank you. So I didn't have to have chemo, but I did have 4 rounds of radiation, just FYI. A good thing for working for the airline for 15 years is I still had flight benefits. It was part of my severance. I had them for about 1.5 years after I was laid off. So every weekend that I could, I flew back to North Carolina to see my partner and my children. However, we were splitting up. I've heard it said before that cancer either strengthens a relationship or it severs it. And unfortunately for me, it's true. I had enormous guilt because it was me who was severing it. And again, like I said earlier, it's very hard for me to sit here 21 years later and admit to really hurting somebody that I loved and, quote unquote, splitting apart my family. But cancer and 9/11 had just pushed me to admit that life is short And I did not want to spend my life comfortable with somebody I didn't love. She was incredibly angry and hurt. And the weekends I would go home, she would spend somewhere else. I was trying to take care of 2 toddlers, being exhausted and guilty all the time. And again, ashamed to say, when Sunday came and she would get back home and I got back in my car to go back to Washington or to the airport to fly, many times I just felt relief. So the one thing I would like to suggest to your listeners, Rachel, that we actually did right, and I'm so grateful for this, and I always give this advice to people who are breaking up, is we went to divorce counseling. That's what I call it. But we were not trying to get back together again, but we saw a therapist together to make sure that we split up nicely. And that was for the sake of our children. If we didn't have children, I'm sure, I'm not a mean person, so I'm sure we would have done it, neutrally, but it wouldn't have been nasty. But if there are children, I would highly recommend that you basically go to split up counseling so that you do it as nicely as you can. We drew up an agreement of the money that I would provide once I was released from active duty, my custody schedule, keeping them insured, all those details. It wasn't legally binding because, again, we were not married and couldn't, but those are just the responsibility that morally don't end, just because you break up. And I would never have left saying, well, they're not my kids. Of course they're my kids. And the one thing also to stress, this type of counseling helps you both come to an agreement on what you're going to say to everybody. It sounds like a stupid thing, but it's probably the number one thing that I'm glad I thought of, because, people are either nosy or they care, or both, of course. And you both need to be in agreement on what you're going to say so it doesn't turn into one person over the other. One person's at fault, the other one isn't. So even though it was my fault, we both agreed to say things have changed and we feel this is best. And, for the most part, people just accepted that and they didn't need to get into our business. So while I was going through cancer for the 11 months I ended up being in DC, the cancer center assigned me a therapist. She happened to be gay. She was a civilian. And it helped me enormously to unload all I was going through without worrying that somebody in the military was going to find out and then I would be dishonorably discharged and a cancer patient. I've never known anyone who had cancer who had to go through it 6 hours away from their family, and I could just talk through these issues with her that I'm not home, and I don't know what my future is. And, my family, as I know, is, falling apart. And, you're not just going through a physical thing, you're going through a mental disease too. And I'm so grateful that the Breast Cancer Center in Bethesda had a therapist for me to talk to. And as some of you know, in the military, if you're well enough to work, that is, if you have some injury or illness that prevents you from being at your normal duty status, if you're well enough to work, then you're assigned to medical hold, or med hold for short. I was in the Washington, D.C. area, of course, going to the hospital in Bethesda. And so I was assigned to the med hold in one of the local Navy installations in the area. By the way, I aced my YN1 exam while I was in Guantanamo Bay. So I was frocked to YN1 the day I walked in to report to the Master Chief in med hold. So I'd set the tone of the office. And to be honest, I think my sailors also kind of told the line with me, because first of all, they knew I had been serving with the Marines for a certain number of months. And, frankly, everyone knew I had cancer. So they knew I was sick. And I was tired, and I was sick and tired of being tired, of course. And that if I could make it to work on time and look squared away, then they had zero legs to stand on. So I got off very easily as an LPO, kind of playing that cancer card a little bit with, you don't want to push me, because I'm going through cancer. All right, that's just between you and me. We won't tell them that that's how it was. But after I'd recovered, from surgery, I was put on a drug called tamoxifen, which hopefully at the time staves off or slows down and prevents any lingering tumors that I might have had. And I had horrible side effects from it. As you know, I said I was tired. in general, but this drug made me incredibly tired, like chronic fatigue tired. And I was exhausted all of the time. And I also had horrible, horrible dizzy spells whenever I stood up. Like every single time I stood up, I had to hang on to the desk or chair because literally the room would start spinning. So they wouldn't declare me in remission and therefore be demobilized, mobilized until I was stable. And that kept me and my family in limbo week after week after week. I mean, at least when you're mobilized, you know generally when you're going to leave your mobilization site and go home. But for me, it was just week after week. And they're like, okay, there's no change in your dizziness and there's no change in your exhaustion. Okay, we want you to wait another week and then try this and come back. And so I kept with the therapist, thank God. Unfortunately, she left her job and they didn't replace her. So I didn't even have her to talk to anymore. And that devastated me. And what started compounding itself on me was loneliness, feeling guilty, fear for not only, my medical condition, but what waited for me at home, and I just had no quality of life when I was going through cancer in Washington, because in the back of my mind, when the cancer ended, hopefully well, I was going home to just a totally different traumatic situation. And finally, the dizziness was so bad that the oncologist said he was concerned that the cancer had spread to my brain. And I'm saying it like that because he said it that casually and like matter of factly, like, okay, your dizziness isn't going away. Maybe you got a brain tumor. And at that, I was completely blindsided. And off I went to get an MRI. And I literally was saying to myself, what else could happen to me? I mean, our son was born 4 days before 9/11. 9/11 happens. I'm a reservist and an airline employee. I lose my job. I get mobilized. I get sent to Cuba. I get cancer. Things are going okay, but not great. I'm breaking up with my partner. I've got to go find a place to live when I get home, whenever that is. And now, oh yes, I might have a brain tumor on top of that. So the seeds of suicide started at this point. And I just could not take one more thing going wrong since 9/11. And now I might have a tumor or a problem with my brain. In the meantime, back in the office, we had a new OIC show up, and she was a commander and another reservist. One thing, just a side note, one thing that I think is a little bit hard for a reservist is you're trying to deal with senior enlisted and officers of all ranks as superiors, when you're in the Navy. But in civilian positions, I'm peers with these people. I'm enlisted and she was an officer, but I mean, in the jobs that I did at airlines, I would work with somebody like that and call her by her first name. And now suddenly, there's that kind of subordinate, I would almost say subservient, but subordinate relationship. So that's just a little, just a little thing about being a reservist that I think sometimes it's hard to switch those on and off and look at these people as, superiors, when normally you'd be like, hey, Karen, you want to go out after work, This commander and I happen to be from nearly the same small town originally, and generally we worked very well together with our crusty Master Chief. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but our Master Chief was a corpsman, and she, again, was in charge of Med-Hold personnel. Neither one of them, however, the commander and the Master Chief, knew really what was going on with me inside, that I was having panic attacks in the bathroom, in the head, that literally I was crying every second I was alone, and that I would go back to my dorm and I would stay alone for the rest of the day and night. And that I was so used to being a superstar sailor that I was giving this Herculean effort to be the sailor I was before cancer. And it's so important for me to tell you, Rachel, that you'll never be the same person again after cancer, or really I mean, really, any other life-threatening event, in my opinion. And so I'm trying to be the person that I used to be, shit hot sailor. And, I'm never going to be that person again. So it's almost like I'm struggling with myself. And, now we've got these seeds of helplessness and hopelessness, and I'm struggling because I can't keep up to who I was before. And, just this swirl plus the exhaustion, the dizziness, the whole thing. So I guess the good news is the MRI came back clear, and they decided to take me off the tamoxifen and just see, if these were side effects, and did I continue to have them, and was it worth the risk of recurrence to me to stay off it. So they also, at that time, they gave me a tentative 1-month demob date. And luckily, the dizziness went away immediately after stopping tamoxifen, but the fatigue didn't. I was exhausted all the time, but very few people saw how bad I was because, again, I was trying desperately to be the YN1, the LPO, and not YN1, the cancer patient. While this is all going on, I kept envisioning my now 2- and 5-year-old sons seeing me come home to pack and move to some other place. And with this 1 month from now demob date hanging out there, it broke me. It just broke me. I started cleaning up my dorm room and trying to figure out the cleanest way to kill myself. Not cleanest, like the most effective for me, but what would I leave behind for somebody to have to deal with? So even at this point, I was very concerned about, how it would affect other people just logistically to find me. And every moment for about a week, I got less and less scared of killing myself. And each day that went by put me closer to desperation. If I didn't kill myself before I demobed, I'd have to go home and face my little kids who haven't lived with me or seen me, or in the younger kids' case, known me basically. And I'd have to face them begging me to stay and cry and not understand why I'm leaving, and face the guilt, the shame, that I felt breaking up with their mom. I'm starting to feel like I'm being selfish. I want what's best for me, and I'm going to, quote unquote, leave them in the lurch. And so, I had this ticking time limit in my head that, I've got to do this. And every day that goes by closer to that demob date, I'm going to have to do it. So the anxiety was mounting and mounting and mounting. So my replacement had come aboard, and I'm going to call her Ski. It's just a nickname that we had for her. So Ski came aboard, and we got along. She and I got along very well, perfectly. But at the end of that week that I was talking about, she came in the office and she looked at me, and she could see right away I was not okay. I decided, on the spot, I don't know why, but I just decided on the spot to just trust her. And so we went in the stairs to get some privacy, and I told her I was thinking about suicide. And the important thing is, it wasn't scaring me anymore. She was stunned. It was probably the last thing she thought was coming out of my mouth. And she was stunned, but she didn't freak out. And she said, you know what, we need to tell Master Chief. We need to go talk to Master Chief. Master Chief will know what to do. And I said, well, it's too late now. The cat's out of the bag. And, ever the person trying to look out for everybody else, I did not want to drop that on Ski and then say, don't tell anybody. That's one of those deal breakers. You never talk about suicide and then say, don't tell anybody else, because, you're putting an enormous burden on the other person. So for obvious reasons. So we went to Master Chief's office and closed her door, and she knew right away something was wrong. She really did. She was seriously the quintessential crusty Master Chief with the, coffee mug always in her hand and very gruff and barky and everything, very blunt and crass. But I knew she thought the world of me in particular, and we did respect each other. And I knew she thought a lot of me. And I repeated myself to her. I said, I'm thinking of killing myself, and it's not scaring me anymore. That's all I said. What happened to me is what should happen to any of you who come forward. She looked at me and said, I'm going to make some calls and you're going to be okay. That's exactly what she said to me. And I exhaled. What goes through your mind is throwing away your clearance, your career, your job, your money, all of it, throwing away all of it, just by making a statement that mentions the word suicide. But I felt like an enormous pressure had been lifted off, taken off my shoulders simply for letting someone in and letting them know what was going on with me. Because sometimes you get stuck in your head, and it's a worse prison than probably an actual prison. And sometimes you don't know that door actually can open. And I'm sorry, Rachel, for getting into all the analogies, but I think it's actually perfect for me. I was locked in my head, and the minute I let Ski in, I knew I was letting Master Chief in. And I just knew, especially because she was a corpsman, I just knew that, I don't know, that things would be okay, but I knew they would not react badly. And thankfully, that's what happened. She called the Naval Hospital in Bethesda, and she had Ski drive me there. Before I walked out of Master Chief's office, though, she said, I don't want you to choose a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And that really stuck with me. And I think many people have heard that phrase, but it was the first time I had ever heard that phrase. And it really was kind of like a little mini slap in the face, like, wow, yeah. If I kill myself, that's it, and maybe what I'm going through is just, something I have to go through, and then we'll find a way to make it palatable, maybe on the other side. But so at the emergency room in Bethesda, and I don't know if this is what happens to everybody, but this is what happened to me. In the ER at the Naval Hospital in Bethesda, I knew I had to do this part alone, and so Ski sat down, and I walked up to the check-in desk to this civilian guy standing there in my shiny white uniform, and I said, this is the hardest thing I'll ever have to say in my entire life, but I'm thinking of killing myself, and it's not scaring me anymore. And he hesitated for a split second, and he too did not freak out. He took me into a room, and a staff psychiatrist came in to talk to me. I was terrified of saying that I was gay and in a same-sex relationship. I felt like I needed to say that because, it's obviously a huge part of what's going on with me. But I was terrified of saying it, and having it, end up in my records somewhere. So I did what all gay people did back then. I just said partner, and stepchildren. They didn't have a bed for me in the psych ward there. So off to Walter Reed Army Hospital then. And at the time, they were two completely different facilities. And at the time, I believe at the time, well, it certainly didn't have a good reputation, let me put it that way. And I think some, significant deficiencies came to light. And I think, this is my personal opinion, I think that had something to do with them consolidating the two facilities into the Naval Hospital in Bethesda. So Walter Reed sucked. It was horrible. And remember, I had been Army actually. So, my expectations weren't terribly high to begin with. And even the staff psychiatrist back in Bethesda was disappointed that they didn't have a bed for me, but off to Walter Reed I went. And everyone was probably who you wouldn't want them to be. They were blunt and bossy and, like I was an annoyance or an aggravation, another person showing up on the psych ward. And I literally felt like I just landed in prison. Plus, and this is important too, as I'll find out later, plus, of course, I started my period the same afternoon. They lock up all your clothes and your wallet, your phone. And now it was late in the afternoon, so the only thing I could wear were pajamas, literally, and a bathrobe and slippers. And soon after, it was time to go to bed. Lights out. They tell you kind of when to go to bed. And my head was spinning. I mean, I got up that morning thinking I was going to work, and here I am at Walter Reed in locked psych ward. So I was reeling. And it all happened so fast, I didn't know if my family would find out what happened to me. And as it turned out, they didn't, until I called them the next day and told them what was going on. While I was there, what was going on, meanwhile, back in the Navy, while I was there, the dorm facility manager and master chief went and they searched my room. There was nothing there dangerous or contraband. So they knew I didn't have a ready plan or tools. But, they told me about it later. And, you go over, oh God, what did my room look like when I left that morning? And, always being the strapped YN1, I was like, oh God, was my room a mess? Who cares? Who cares? I wanted to die. Who cares what my room looked like at that point? So the next morning I get up for my first full day at the psych ward in Walter Reed, and I had to join a group of other patients. There were probably about maybe 10, 12 patients there. They were all active duty in all 5 branches of the military and all ranks. Of course, we were not supposed to talk about our ranks, but of course we all did. Because sometimes it's important to your story too. So, who cares? I didn't care. But I wanted to get out of there as soon as I could. So I knew the fastest way was to participate. So I basically told all of them what I've told you, except, of course, masking the gay aspect of it. I don't know what you're all thinking right now and how long I've been going on. Sorry. But the room was silent when I stopped, and someone said, why didn't you break sooner? And, that was another little slap in my face. Like, what? Shoot, I've been through a lot, in a year and a half at that point. And you know what? Kudos to me for hanging on so long, I guess. I ended up there for 3 days, just going to therapy and doing stupid workbooks and convincing the doctors I was not acute. I do want to say that, having my period made me think that maybe my nosedive moods also could have been aggravated by PMS, which I never thought I had PMS and never really thought about it. But I really wondered, because I did feel better after, like my 3rd day on my period. I felt better, and I didn't feel like it was simply for talking about my life story with the 15 other people, or, talking to the doctors, or doing, touchy-feely workbooks. I really wondered if physically there was something going on with that. So from then on, I used to keep a mood diary and track my period, and I definitely could see later on that, the day before and the day of my period definitely was a factor in my mood. So, if you're a woman listening to this, it might be important for you to kind of keep track of that and see just if it affects your mental health and your moods like it did for me. I left Walter Reed without any medications, but a follow-up with the Bethesda psych outpatient doctor. So they added now psych outpatient doctors to my oncologist and physical therapist. And I returned to work a few days later. The command master chief of that facility asked to see me right away, and she was incredibly supportive, and everything all of you hoped she would be, she was, and she was glad to know that I sought help. And she actually praised me for stepping forward on my own, and not for them finding out or me attempting or something like that. She really made me feel good, in a way that I did come forward on my own, and that she had an open door policy. And I absolutely believed her that she had an open door policy if I ever needed it. However, and this goes back to one of my know your audience points, the commander had me come right to her office. I didn't know what she knew, because I never saw her when I came out to Master Chief about being suicidal. I never saw her for the rest of that day. So I didn't know what she knew. So I played it safe, and I formally reported to her, line 1 French reports as ordered, ma'am. This was a person who was a reservist working at the time. She worked for a major US corporation. And so I'm sure, she had lifelong experience, civilian experience in HR matters. And she said to me, I'm counting the days till you leave here. Dismissed. I was absolutely stunned and devastated and embarrassed, and like she had just knocked the few couple healthy steps I had achieved being at the psych ward and getting help and coming forward. I instantly felt like somebody had pulled away those 3 steps I had climbed, and I was the most useless sailor in the Navy when she said that to me. And I vowed right there and then that the way Master Chief handled this was the way a leader should. And I would never, ever forget that if ever I was the chief. Master Chief ordered me to only work half days. And I had to bring to her, like I was one of her children, I had to bring her a log every day of what I ate, what I slept, how long I slept, how I slept, and anything I did outside of work every day, so she could help me not withdraw from the possible shame of voicing suicidality. So, when I started saying that to you, I felt like you were all going to think, wow, she's treating you like a baby, or, just trying to put her thumb down on you and make sure, you don't kill yourself on her watch. But it actually, I think, was the Corpsman side of her that was really, just trying to keep tabs on how I was doing, not necessarily what I was doing. I started eating regularly and taking a nap when I went back to my dorm at noon, which, the overachiever lion one. I hated leaving at noon, but I even recognized at that point I could not work full days. I was exhausted. I just couldn't. I lived near Bowling Air Force Base, and so I would walk the Anacostia footpaths over to Bowling Air Force Base, and I just would look out at the water, and I would just try to believe what my mental health people were trying to tell me, that there can be a better way at looking at your circumstances, and you just don't know what's right around the corner. Everything is just so horrible in the present that it's very difficult to look past that. A month later, I demobilized, and I'm sure the commander was very relieved to see me go, so that I would not be the black stain on her otherwise exemplary mobilization, I'm sure. The next few years, I just want to fast forward a little bit, Rachel, but the next few years were very hard for me, trying to assimilate back to a job. I had only worked at Sara Lee for like a month before I left on mobilization, and then I was gone for 17 months. So, they had somebody else do my job, and yes, legally they have to keep your job open for you. But, they have to have somebody do it for 17 months too. So, they're trying to fit me back into a similar job. And I was trying to afford my tiny little studio apartment and, support my partner, my ex-partner. I was trying to, have my boys for my custody weeks in this tiny little apartment. Money was a huge issue for me, or lack thereof, I guess. There were plenty of times, they don't know this to this day, but there were plenty of times that they ate dinner and didn't realize that I didn't. I just didn't have the money. And Sara Lee, I just want you all to think of Sara Lee as like a good company, because they were an excellent company. They tried so hard for me to be there at work and, in a position, similar to what I was doing, but I just couldn't work in an office anymore. Noise started affecting me. Being around groups of people really affecting me. I couldn't concentrate. I just kept getting shuffled to other departments. And then in 2004, the Armed Forces Inaugural Committee, which I'll call the AFIC, was gearing up. And they're the joint task force, basically, that screens military people to participate in all of the inauguration activities. So, for example, when you see the procession down Pennsylvania Ave, and you see the servicemen and women lining the parade route, those people are all screened by this committee, and each branch has their own people who screen these packages. And just a side note, if you ever can do that, do it. It's an incredibly interesting and unusual temporary duty that you can have. So that's just my little plug for the AFIC. So it was ramping up for what was the 2004 inaugural. And that same Master Chief was the coordinator of Navy's participation. And she called me a year later after I left, and she asked me to come back on active duty and be her right hand. That's how much she thought of me, and how my coming forward with suicidal ideation did not affect my career or my clearance or anything. I jumped at the chance to leave my civilian life, which, I just didn't have a life. All I was doing was existing basically for my children. And even then, I just wasn't there all the time mentally anyway. I could make better money being on active duty. And so I was moved again on ADSW, which are active duty for special work orders, for 6 months. She wanted me there for past the inaugural. And I said, no, I'll do it till election day. And then I've got to go back, because I knew it would be too easy for me to be on active duty and just want to keep staying and basically ignoring my life, my very horrible life in North Carolina. Well, silver linings, as they say. While I was there, I met the woman who became my eventual wife. And just a funny note, she was a civilian working at one of the other bases in the Washington area, and she was an admiral's secretary. And here I was, a Lion One, saying, wait a minute, you get paid about double what I get paid, and we basically do, or in my case, I can do the exact same job as you. But anyway, I fell in love with her, not her job. So I told her when we first met that if we didn't work out, I was leaving DC in 6 months, and we would never have to see each other again, which, that's a good way to say that to a potential partner. Hey, if it doesn't work out, I'm moving, and we've got an instant out. You don't have to ghost each other. So, I was there for 6 months, and we've been together now for 19 years. So it worked out very well. After I demoked, she moved to North Carolina about 5 months later. My ex-partner and I had come to a very compatible situation where we were very good parents, again, together, and very supportive of each other. We just, when you break up, you just have to get past those things. And, I recognize many people don't get past, all the hurt and anger and, being crappy to each other. But we did. And again, I'm sure it's because we had children. She liked my wife, my now wife, and the boys did too. So the boys actually grew up to say, we have 3 moms, which in our a little bit conservative town in North Carolina, and certainly at their school, was something that certainly didn't get said all the time, that they had 3 moms, not 2 moms, 3 moms. When I came back home from working at the AFIC, I tried again to go back to Sara Lee. I just couldn't do it. I gave it the old college try, and I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't work for the man, as they say. I needed to be by myself. So I quit abruptly, and I began, believe it or not, a house cleaning business. I was an employee of one employee, and I was very successful at it. Thankfully, I did learn a lot about cleaning in Army basic training, and just being on active duty, and basically how I was raised too. But I love cleaning. I'm just one of those weirdos who, Clorox is perfume to me. And I wanted to work by myself. So it was all word of mouth. I did a very good job. Totally enjoyed it. And frankly, I just needed to do physical work and not sit in a cubicle and get lost in my head again about how I'm not being successful at Sara Lee, because I just didn't care about what I was doing. And meanwhile, back in the reserve, I made Chief Yeoman in 2006. Again, just to please illustrate that you can come back from asking for mental health care. It doesn't have to ruin everything, or It doesn't have to mar or black stain you. As far as I know, and to this day, nobody in my reserve center, as far as I know, nobody ever knew what had happened to me in Washington. So I was very, very surprised and very happy. But money problems and physical aches were telling me to stop cleaning. And I did. And I accepted a job with the Department of Social Services in that county. I was a Medicaid caseworker. So, yep, I'm going back to cubicle hell. But, as a yeoman, I love regulation. I love paperwork. I love all that stuff. So it really, if I had been healthy, it would have been a perfect job for me. However, it was a disaster from the start. There was no training program and available at the time. And so I toiled and I did next to nothing for my first few months. The supervisor asked me to try to attempt doing evaluations, people's Medicaid applications. She said, basically, just try to do it. And, I'm here if you need help. And I was experienced enough in the civilian work and had many, many years working for, civilian employers. And I pushed back. It was the first time I'd ever done that in my life. I pushed back and said, no, I'm not going to wing it doing work that has, first of all, government regulations with zero training and potentially take away some families' health care because I wasn't trained. She was a horrible, horrible supervisor. And now remember, I'm a chief petty officer, so I know a thing or two about supervising and being a leader and looking out for your people and taking care of your junior sailors. And she was none of this. She berated me all the time and, just told me I was not cutting it. And I was, everything I did was wrong, even though it's what she told me to do the day before. And the same feelings I had before I came forward in Bethesda, those suicidal, what I like to call helpless and hopeless feelings, they started all over again. I would go to the parking lot on my breaks and I would just sob. I didn't cry. I sobbed, and I yell out loud and I'm like, God, why, why can't I do this? Why can't I just find something to do, that can meet all of my needs. And I did. I thought about suicide over and over again. I was so tired. Being a chief, it's a great thing. And I'm sorry, Rachel, one thing, just shout out to Eric, who did your podcast a couple times ago. Eric, for those who don't know, was also a Navy chief and spoke extensively about his experience being a chief and the healthcare things that can come up both with yourself and with your subordinates. So, being a reservist, it doesn't end. Your responsibilities don't end when you leave after the drill weekend. So I had that going on. I had money problems. I had children problems, a very lucrative job. I mean, I have to tell you that, being a caseworker for social services, it's a great job on paper. It has wonderful benefits, incredible benefits. It paid very well. And yet it chipped away from me every single day. I would go home crying, or a ball of knots, and lots of you, I know, even if you're in the Navy, you can admit it to old chief here. I know some of you get up every day in the military and you're like, I don't want to go. I can't go. You're a bundle of nerves and somehow you go. So believe me, I'm sitting here. I feel you. I understand. Then 2008 happened and the housing crisis doubled my caseload. At that point, I was formally trained, but I couldn't keep up. I mean, and it's not a job where you can work through lunch or come in early or stay late. You can't do that. And so, I've got the same amount of time to do double the number of applications. And I couldn't keep up. And this had never happened to me in my entire life, that I couldn't do the work expected of me. And on the way to work one day, I still don't know what happened, but I drifted into another lane and a truck rubbed up against me. He didn't hit me per se and wasn't hurt, but I was stunned. But of course, I actually made it to work on time. Always the sailor. I went into work and I asked to leave just to get checked out because I was in shock or stunned, And of course they wanted to say no because I was behind in my work. So there's kind of your first clue that maybe I need to be rethinking working here. So I left. I mean, I took the time anyway. I left and went to my civilian primary care doctor office. It wasn't my doctor, it was whoever was working. And she asked me what happened. And I just lost it right there in her office. I did. I just started crying and sobbing, and, those racking sobs where you cannot get like a complete sentence out. And she just listened to me, which was, sometimes all you need is just somebody to listen to you and not try to solve your problems after your first sentence. And she did. God bless her. She let me just get it all out. She wrote me out of work for a couple of days, and she got me an immediate psych referral. And I went that same day, and the psychiatrist was incredibly compassionate and of course ensured I wasn't actively or otherwise suicidal. But I just needed immediate help. I just needed somebody to help me with this. And she did. She gave me some anti-anxiety medication, which was the first time I'd ever taken quote unquote psych drugs, just to help me sleep, and she referred me to a counselor. Longest story short, sorry, Rachel, longest story, I'm glad you're not paying by the minute for these things, but longest story short, I got on psych medications and I had therapy. And when the agency, social services, when they formally counseled me on my lack of keeping up anyway, I went home that day and my wife said, quit that job. So I did. I went back to cleaning houses, even though it was a pay cut. And, folks, sometimes your health needs to win out. Sometimes you have to say to yourself, money will come from somewhere. And I don't say that casually, but sometimes your health needs to be the one that wins. And I'm so glad I did. And I felt better. I was back to cleaning and, we were making it, we were struggling, but I didn't work there anymore. And because of that, I stopped going to therapy. I was thinking all was well, and I stopped taking the meds. And some of you are wondering, why did you go to a civilian healthcare provider? Well, I hadn't filed a VA claim, and I finally did 3 years after I could have. So again, some advice from Chief here. The minute you can file for a VA claim, please do so. There's no reason not to. I waited all those years because I resisted the label disabled. And I felt guilty that people were coming back with limbs missing. All I had missing were my breasts and ovaries. But I knew we needed the money, and I needed the free healthcare, frankly. And so I filed, and I was given 60%, and it was all cancer related. And it helped. It helped a lot. So about a year or so after, I, however, just couldn't keep up financially, and I started seesawing moods. I mean, that's the thing. Those of you, obviously who have children, you can budget all you want to, and there's the inevitable, he needs new sneakers. He's going on a field trip, and those things, those $25, $75. I need lunch money. Those things add up. And it's really hard to stay on a budget with it. And I just couldn't keep up. We were really struggling. And my moods just started seesawing out of control. I stayed up for nights, just as a very weak joke, I stayed up all night cleaning for like a night or two. While my house certainly never looked better. It's not healthy. It's not healthy at all. And I'd surf the net. And worse yet, I'd start buying things that we couldn't afford. I mean, I remember specifically buying a laptop that I didn't need. I didn't even need a laptop. And I would do it secretly, which is even worse. And you just get caught in that cyclone of shame. And I think what you're all starting to see here is, for me, when things go wrong, it's all inside, it's all internalized, and I put on the happy front and everything's great, and I'm like killing myself on the inside, I guess would be a way to say it. But, so I do all these things secretly, or, I just can't sleep, I've got insomnia, and meanwhile, my heart's racing, and, I've got all this adrenaline, and of course, worrying about the credit card bill that will come later, but later's later, I don't have to deal with that right now. And then I would just plunge into despair worrying about it. I was still emotionally checked out from my kids. And, I'd have them for a week at a time. And I'm just here to be honest, I'd phone it in with them, whatever the bare minimum was. And I still, sitting here today, I still have guilt from that. And I've actually apologized to them, in the last year or so, and just saying, all I said was, I'm sorry for what I didn't do when I should have. And, they're sweet. They're 20 and 24 now. And, they're like, no, everything, you did everything fine. Because, lots of times kids don't remember. So try to let yourself off the hook a little bit. But, going back to there, I'd let myself go. And I ended up losing 3 teeth in my little cyclone of horrors because I didn't care anymore. I just didn't literally care. And I was just, on autopilot, just getting through life. And my wife didn't even know my teeth were so bad until they abscessed. And I spent a few days in the VA hospital, fighting, a pretty severe abscess. And at that point, she gave me an ultimatum. You need to get your shit together. So I made an appointment the next day, and the local VA clinic took me right in. And again, I was evaluated and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I'm not sure, Rachel, if I've ever actually agreed with that. And I certainly, I have a bachelor's degree, but it's not in psychology. And, I'm just a layman with all this, but I'm not sure that I've actually agreed with that diagnosis. But the more important thing, and the way I kind of get past it is, we found a cocktail that worked for me and I evened out. And so whatever works is kind of where I am now. And I got a therapist. And some of you are wanting to know what was my VA experience. And here's what it was. I wasn't consistent about my medication, and I was not consistent about therapy. And a big reason why was my providers kept leaving. Like for psychiatrists, it must be a great job. Again, like me in social services, it must be a great job on paper. But, all these people are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. And, the VA system was getting bombarded, and especially in mental health. And, just a little side note, Rachel, if you don't mind, after Vietnam, and, I'm 58. So, I was, I remember the post-Vietnam era very well. And, people were, veterans were shunned, and, to have what we used to call shell shock, you just didn't talk about it, or, something to be embarrassed about, or I don't know. And now we're all supposed to be so okay about talking about mental health, which, P.S., Rachel, is why I asked you. You didn't come to me. I came to you and said, I want to tell my story, because we are supposed to be okay to talk about mental health. And I want to, pay it forward, basically. But anyway, but that job must look good on paper, because no kidding, in 3 years, I probably went through 6 psychiatrists, and those are the people prescribing medication. And then the therapist would stay a little bit longer. But every time I turn around, they're like, oh, you're being seen by Dr. whoever. And I'm like, well, what happened to Dr. whoever before? And they're like, oh, well, they've left. Okay, fine. All right, whatever. So, I'd have to always start with somebody else. And I just started skipping my medication. Well, that's a recipe for disaster, especially if you have bipolar disorder. It's normal to resent that you have, that you've been able to live your life for, in my case, for over 40 years. And now I have to take this medicine for the rest of my life. And, it's a very insidious thing about, I'll say specifically for bipolar medicine, and I don't know because I'm a layman, but psychiatric medication in general is you feel better and then you think you're okay and you don't need the medicine, when in fact, the medicine is helping you chemically to be okay. So unfortunately, it's very common for people to go off their meds because they think they don't need them anymore, when, give it a week, as I would say, give it a week. My wife can absolutely tell if I'm on my medication or not. And because of that, she would make me put my weekly pill tray right on the counter, and I literally had to take my medicine in front of her like I was in jail, in front of the jail nurse. So really, my only criticism for me of the VA system was in mental health, that the providers were very good and I could get appointments, but the inconsistent staffing, it just created holes that somebody slippery like me could slip right through. So, and with the diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and I want to encourage people this as well, if you have another condition rated after you get your VA disability rating, file another claim and claim it. So remember, from cancer, I had 60%. With a new diagnosis of bipolar disorder, I filed another claim and I got bumped to 100% permanent and total. So, and in the meantime, same-sex marriage was legalized and recognized both by the IRS and the VA. So my payment went up significantly. So here's me clapping, these things that I never thought, Rachel, that I would see in my lifetime, same-sex marriage and the IRS, so I'm so happy for you younger veterans and service women and men who you have no concept of what it was like beforehand. But anyway, so I stopped working. Stopped my cleaning job. And believe it or not, I took a day job at, Rachel, I'd let you guess, but you're not going to guess. I worked at a Domino's Pizza, of all places. I was the oldest one there. And it was a very low stress job for me after all the stressful jobs I've had in my life. And I had done it a couple summers when I was in college, so I knew what I was getting into. And I was a delivery driver and made pizza, whatever. But I became the de facto trainer. And I loved all the mentoring I was able to do especially with kids for whom this was their first job, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, just like in my reserve unit as a chief. I got to know all the schools and the businesses I delivered to, and I got a lot of my self-esteem back. And, frankly, I'll just tell you, you make a lot of money, you go home with money in your pocket every day. So that helped us eventually get to a debt-free life, which, that erased a lot of my problems. And as a side note, I would just want to encourage you to be creative in where you look for work. I dare say most people would not think of leaving a job with the county and saying, you know what, I think I'm going to go work at a Domino's Pizza. But for me, it's what I needed. And again, like I said before, sometimes your health has to win. And it did. And look, it got us debt free. Who would have thought? And I'm almost to the end, Rachel, but I think, and I know that this next thing is something at least one of you needs to hear is okay. I did not retire from the Navy or the Naval Reserve. I went into the IRR for what would be my last 4 years. I figured I had given the military enough of me, and secretly meaning, that I was gay, and at the time, Don't Ask, Don't Tell had not been repealed yet. So I was going to be selfish and be there for my family for once and go to all the things that I had ever missed in their lives. I also didn't care about retirement points because as a reservist with very minimal active duty time, the pension wasn't going to be significant. So I didn't even do the minimum correspondence courses when I was in the IRR. I was honorably discharged with 20 years, but I only have 16 good years. And as far as I'm concerned, all 20 of them are good years. So I will never qualify for a pension. And technically, I'm not retired, but I did 20 years. So, whatever. I've been perfectly happy with that decision. So whoever needs to hear this, if the military isn't what you want to be doing, it's okay not to do the coveted 20 years. And for anybody who then says to you, like I said in the very beginning, you're stupid or you're giving up free money or you'll regret it or whatever, here's what I would say back to them. You're not living my life and you're not going to be living my life in X amount of years. So unless you personally are going to give me that money, it's my concern and you don't need to worry about it. So there you go. So let me tell you a little bit about my wife. So, because I really, and I talked to her about this before I came on with you, Rachel, today. And, I just asked her, is there anything you want me to tell about you or, your perspectives or whatnot? And so we're just going to touch on that for a second. So my wife is Argentine and our plan had been all along to move to Buenos Aires once our youngest son was out of high school. But because of COVID, we delayed for 6 months, but here we are. I've been consistent with my meds. For years now. But because, and this is for anyone who wants to live abroad as a veteran, because the VA will not send medication here, I had to enroll in the VA's foreign medical program. Basically, I pay out of pocket for a meds doctor and the prescriptions, and the VA reimburses me. I was fortunate to find a bilingual psychiatrist who also does therapy, which is incredibly, in my experience, it's very unusual in the United States to have a meds doctor who also does your therapy. So I only have to repeat the stories once. And just P.S., Rachel, a little joke for you. This is the cheapest therapy I've had in a week. So my meds are identical here in Argentina as they were in the United States, and very easy to find, and cheap. If I had to buy them in the US, they're much cheaper here. When I moved here, however, I hadn't had therapy or needed it, really. I mean, really being honest, I hadn't really needed it for probably about 5 years or so. So I told my doctor here that I just needed a med psychiatrist. But, you know, the enormity of the move showed me how much I needed her as a therapist. This country, you know, it's significantly different. It's not bilingual. And I had like a high school level of Spanish and speaking at home, you know, with my wife and her dad who lived with us. The seasons are opposite. I mean, that alone can really throw you. Like right now, you know, it's beautiful outside, 70, and it's the beginning of autumn for us. So it's, I dare say, exactly the same for you folks in the United States, but it's a very rare time of year when we're both identical. The culture is very informal, but it's very different. I moved to Buenos Aires, a city of 15 million people. I'm not living in a little town in North Carolina anymore. And my father-in-law with dementia moved with us. And worsened almost immediately. And he now lives in a home. And I'd like to tell you about healthcare here in Argentina. Mental health and the elderly are revered concepts here. It's completely Argentine to have a therapist. And I'll wait for all of you to get back on your chair because I know you just fell off your chair. It's completely normal here and expected that you have a therapist. I mean, can you imagine anyone ever saying that to you? The elderly, they're loved and spoiled and revered, and you better give up your seat. There'll be 12 people give up their seat on a subway if an elderly person comes onto the subway. And my father-in-law, he lives in a home where they spoil him. They call him Senor Lorenzo, and he actually has a girlfriend. Unfortunately, he doesn't know it, but she thinks he's her boyfriend. It's very sweet. And these folks take excellent care of him. It's very inexpensive. Healthcare is very inexpensive here. But trust me, it's the place you'd want your grandma to be. Argentinos are very talky and curious and nosy and nicely so. I mean, psych meds, I don't think are as commonly prescribed as they are in the US, but that's just my opinion. And my cocktail works for me, so we're going to stick with that theory. And one thing I have learned from Dr. Lucila, my psychiatrist, is how important a routine is for my mental health. It doesn't have to be ironclad or inflexible, but it's what gives me stability and comfort when the inevitable speed bumps happen. And Rachel, I purposely did not tell you this in advance because I want you to see how I can handle a speed bump like this. But last week, when you and I were talking about setting up this appointment, what you didn't know is that my stepmother in New York was hit and killed crossing a street. A very hard thing about living in a different part of the world is that you cannot just get on a plane in the last minute and be there. It's just not financially possible. And I hate to say that, but that's just my reality. So I texted my psychiatrist, Dr. Lucila, and I told her I might need an extra session, and I told her why. And she said, and I quote, "Let me know if you need a session. Remember to keep following your routine if possible." And it's so true. I mean, I just got up and I, did the things that I do during my day. I go to a gym now. I'm not a gym rat, but I go on the elliptical for 40 minutes and, I take my medicine every day at the same time. And, I kept my routine because that's what helps me not feel guilty about not going. It keeps my grief manageable. And circling back to my wife, I tell my wife everything that I'm feeling and anything. Obviously, she knows about that, but anything, she knows I'm doing this. so that she can best help me and support my mental health should the need arise. And sometimes you need to have another person, you need somebody in your life to know all these things that are going on with you, because sometimes the changes are so subtle that you don't see them, but the other person in your life can see them. And that's why I think it's so important, that I include my wife in this conversation. I am very lucky to be alive, both, from a cancer standpoint and from a mental health standpoint. And really, just to finish things up, you're welcome, Rachel. What I hope you all can take maybe from my story is the people who seem to have their shit together probably don't. If you're a leader, don't freak when someone steps forward. If you're a family member, don't be afraid to hold your loved one to the things that keep them stable. If you're military, I am proof positive that you probably won't lose anything stepping forward and asking for help. Give healthcare people a chance. If you have a bad experience, please try again. And if that's a bad experience, try again. I know how alone you can feel. I really do. But just keep getting up in the morning. And if it helps, know that if I hadn't gotten immediate support, you might not be hearing from me today. I'm not being melodramatic. It's just the truth. And I'm here to tell you, people do want to help. Sometimes you just need to let them know sometimes.
Well, Beth, first off, I just want to say my deepest condolences to you for what happened last week. I honestly had no idea. Obviously, you said that you didn't tell me on purpose, but the way that you continue to carry yourself, I think there's a lot to be said about that. And so you are such a shining example of not only resilience, but picking yourself up in the hardest situations that so many people really don't come back from, to just blatantly say it. A lot of people don't come back from the things that you've come back from. And you haven't. Obviously, we don't know everything that you were feeling as these things have happened throughout your life, even up until recently. We only know what you tell us, and we can only picture it to the capacity that our brains can picture it. But oh my goodness, I just appreciate so much you being here today and sharing your story and sharing that value to other people. But I do have a couple things that I wanted to just point out that stood out to me in your story. And then I do have just a couple questions. I could deep dive into so many things that that you shared, but for the sake of time, I'll just ask a couple questions to you. But first off, things that stood out to me. Man, you talk about how your health needs to be the one that wins and that money will come. And that stood out so much to me because I can't tell you how many times I have talked to people who are unhappy, not even just in the military, even civilian side, people that are so unhappy with what they do, but they're so worried about money, or maybe they physically really shouldn't be doing what they're doing. You see this a lot in the military. People that mentally, physically, they shouldn't be doing it, but they stick with it because they're so worried about money or they're so worried about the future. And I love how you really reiterated and hit on those points where, you come first, your health matters, whether it's your mental health or your physical health, or even maybe it's just your family. Money will always be there, money will always come, but your health comes first. And I love how you reframed the situation with the commanding officer when you shared that snippet about what was said to you after you spent those 3 days in the psychiatric facility, and that you didn't let it break you. You used that as fuel to become a better leader yourself. I think that there's so many people that are faced with negative reactions in the military when it comes to mental health. And it can be so incredibly hard to not let something like that break you. I have to say that you're the second person that I've had on this podcast that openly on the podcast shared that they're part of the LGBTQ community. And the one thing that I have to say about members of the LGBTQ community, specifically in the military and specifically that served during the era of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, have the best mindset. And I don't even know if you realize it, and maybe you do, but the mindset that is there of resilience. I see this common theme, and it's so beautiful how you go into the military knowing that you already have something working against you, knowing that you're gay and that it's not allowed, and that you're facing dishonorable discharge or maybe even animosity from people if they find out about it. You go in with the odds stacked against you to a point, but you still perform to the best of your ability, and you're still so poised about it, and you become this incredible leader throughout the way. And I just wanted to commend you for that. So, question, unless you want to, did you have comments on what I said?
No, well, first of all, I was glad to take a breath, not talk. But no, I appreciate you saying everything. And I do, and I'm in several Facebook groups too, for especially for female sailors and retirees, et cetera. And, every now and then when I see see a question about, my wife and I are doing this, or, my wife and I are whatever, and I just, sometimes I'll actually comment and say, I don't have an answer to your question, but I'm just so thrilled that you don't even have to think twice about having a wife, and that you live in an era now where it's so completely normal and okay that you just don't have to think like things anyway. So that would be my one comment. Is it is very strange to compare and contrast, the military of 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and 40 years ago when I went into the Army Reserve. But no, questions, please. Anything you want to ask, please go ahead.
Yes. So I wanted to reflect back on the little snippet of your story with Ski. And I'm curious, what made you trust her to tell her that you were thinking of suicide? Do you think knowing that she wouldn't react badly helped you trust her more with talking about your thoughts on suicide, or was there something else there?
We had known each other maybe I'm going to say 2 weeks. We had known each other 2 weeks. Pretty much as soon as I got that temporary or tentative demob date, and she was a mobilized reservist also. She was mobilized to work as the LPO of the Med Hold, and her husband was active duty Coast Guard. So I'm just throwing that out there. So she and I, because you're turning over to somebody, you have to work closely. And I just recognized in her that she was firm and compassionate, like as far as acting as the LPO, which, of course, that's what I thought as myself as well, but just in a different way. Maybe, whereas I'm more of like an outgoing kind of person. She was just kind of the quieter, almost analytical is the word I want to think. And so I knew, I just had a feeling that this is somebody who would want to do the right thing. That, you know what, Rachel, that's the best way to say. I just knew from being with her that she would want to do the right thing. And if she didn't know how to do the right thing, she would ask. But of course, in my situation, it was not her situation to figure out what to do. She knew immediately, as did I. And I don't know if I said this, but when we finished, kind of getting the initial conversation over, I said to her, and this I think is important to point out, I said to her, now I'm going to do the right thing, and you and I are both going to go to Master Chief, because I did not want that on her to then have to worry about saying to me, we need to go tell Master Chief. So that's how I knew. I just had a feeling that she would want to do the right thing, whatever that was.
That's awesome. And, I think that goes to showing that when people in leadership positions in the military just do their job in a humanistic way, and they have those leadership skills, it really exudes out of them, because then people feel more comfortable. And that's really, I guess, what I got of what you're saying, is that it's not so much that they're sitting here and they're throwing resources at the group every single day, or saying like, hey guys, I know everything about mental health, or I know everything about suicide prevention. Like, none of that matters at the end of the day. If you just act like the leader that you're supposed to be, and you act like the human you're supposed to be, and you find that appropriate balance between being a leader, but then also being a human. And not everyone knows how to do it, but I'm so glad that Ski was able to be there for you and help you out during that difficult time. And I'm so glad that you're here today to be able to share your incredible story with that support that you received from Ski at that time. The next question I have for you is, when you got your cancer diagnosis, was there any kind of support that the military offered to you, or was it just more around the realm of therapy that anyone would receive? And when I say support, I'm talking about like cancer or chronic illness specific support for other people that might be going through what you were going through at the time.
Yes, and I touched on it, but just to be much more specific. So when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, it was, like I said, at the Naval Hospital in Bethesda, which has a fabulous breast care center. And they take what some people you've heard before as a multidisciplinary approach. And what that means is once you have a diagnosis, then you literally spend a day, what I call round robining, with every disciplinary, or every, let's make it simple, every section or aspect of your treatment. For example, the surgeon, the oncologist, the radiologist, the physical therapist, and before you even make a decision, before I made the decision, I'm going to have bilateral modified radical mastectomies, or in English, both of them removed. I spent a day with a group of people in every specialty of breast cancer who had already reviewed my records and were ready to tell me what their recommendations and thoughts were on it. And one of them they include is mental health or therapy, counseling, whatever word you want to say. There was a dedicated counselor in the breast care center in Bethesda. I don't know what other military facilities have, if they have something like that. And I will unfortunately say this observation too. The Naval Hospital in Bethesda is nicknamed the President's Hospital. And I was the only one most times in my appointments. It's fabulous. There's a ton of money that has been put into this breast care center. It's fabulous. But what I will tell you is many appointments, especially in the beginning, I was the only person sitting there in uniform. It was women, basically. I don't know if they were veterans or if they were spouses, dependents, whatever. Most times it was women there, presumably, I would guess, to get their mammograms, whereas I'm the only person, the only active duty person sitting there. So I felt like incredibly blessed to have been sent there, and they took excellent care of me. I don't have a single negative thing to say about the Naval Hospital in Bethesda. But yes, to answer your question, they immediately assigned the therapist that I was talking about, but it was optional for me. But I absolutely took advantage of it. Yes.
So in regards to your VA disability, and the reason I'm asking this question is because there are a number of people who don't file disability right away when they get out, and they wait. Is this something that you reached out to resources for, or did you do it all on your own when you filed?
I did it with the assistance of the Disabled American Veterans. And luckily for me, the VA regional office happened to be in the same city that I lived in. And the DAV office, they were both in the federal building. The DAV office was literally like across the hall from the VA regional office. So I don't know who told me to go to the DAV, but so I went and had an initial visit and I said, I don't know how to do any of this, but if it's something I can do myself, fine. And they said, okay, now I'm just disclaiming this, that I don't know what the current procedure is now, but I will tell you what it was for me in 2006. And that the first thing he said was, I need a one-page copy of your medical record. And I was still a reservist and, made friends with the HM1. And I literally made a one-sided copy of my entire medical record, which with cancer, you can imagine like how thick that was. And so I had it like within a week or so, and you submitted it paper. It wasn't electronic at all. And they literally walked it across the hall to the VA. And, they told me right away, it's going to be 6 months. And it was like 6 months to the day. And but yeah, what you lose when you don't file immediately, you lose all of those years of payment. Now, again, in my case, I don't know what it is today, but I was retroactively paid from the date that I filed. So I got basically a huge check of 6 months times my monthly allowance. But you don't have those, in my case, 3 years that I could have filed. So, I always tell that story, Rachel, because I want people to understand you're not taking away from somebody, a quote unquote, more deserving veteran. You're not taking away from them if you file as soon as you can. But that was absolutely where my mindset was. Like, I don't deserve this. It's almost like survivor's guilt in a way.
No, I completely get that. I hear that a lot from people who feel like they shouldn't file because there are people who have it worse off. And so I think that a lot of listeners to this podcast can relate to that. So I appreciate you sharing that. So I don't know how much you know about the military today versus the military when you were in, but to kind of close this off, I would love to hear your opinion on if you think that things today, from as far as you know, are better in multiple aspects, because you shared a couple different things in your story. If you think they're better today than they were when you were in, and even if they are better, what things you would like to see implemented within the military to help people that were in your situation?
Oh, you're gonna make me think now to finish this. Okay. Yes, I definitely think there are things that are better that are not obvious to my story or what I talked about. I think the opportunities for women, that's a huge one. Did I not read that there's a submarine that had an all-female crew or something like that? I mean, submarine. This list of things I never thought I would see in my lifetime. I think, I'm going to say this. I like that the Navy made a unisex uniform. That like women wear the white jumpers. I like that. I mean, we're all sailors, and to give a different uniform to me means we're different, and we have to fight that enough as it is. So, it's just a little thing that I think is actually a big thing. Everybody recognizes that sailor suit, and if you have a junior enlisted in their Cracker Jacks walking around New York City because it's Fleet Week, it's not going to be, oh, well, what service are you in? You know what I mean? They're in their whites or their blues, I guess. But yeah, that's something. It's a negative thing, but I think I'm glad about it is, and unfortunately, it seems to be a big topic on your podcast, Rachel, is the amount of sexual assault in the military. I have no idea what it was before, and I don't know how we defined before, but I guess the one thing I'm glad about is that it's getting to be better to report it. And believe me, I know it's not anywhere close to what it should be, but I have to think that back in the day, if you were a lesbian and you rebuffed a man, then you were probably going to get reported for being a lesbian, or if you were straight and a superior basically tried to coerce you into a sexual relationship, and you refused, you'd be turned in as being a lesbian, or you would unfortunately let the assault happen and then no one would believe you. Do you see what I mean? So I think while sexual assault is horrible and should never happen, I think kind of I hope this comes out right, but that it's being reported and acted on, it needs to be more. It needs to be, obviously it needs to be more, dealt with.
I get what you're trying to say. Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's better than it was before. It's still not
right
where it needs to be. Obviously, the best case scenario would be that everyone's comfortable reporting and or there's no sexual assaults at all. But it definitely is better than it was before. I get what you're saying.
I'm so afraid I'm leaving the wrong impression with your listeners. So let me say it this way. I'm glad that there are programs developed and being developed to encourage people to report this horrible thing that has happened to them, that they totally did not ask for, do not deserve, and absolutely need to be believed. That's what I'll say.
What about for things that you think could still improve, as far as you know?
Okay, and I'll share that I'm not sure that this is so please help me if this isn't current. I think that there needs to be a very easy system for military, active duty, and reserves and guard. I think there needs to be access to civilian healthcare when it cannot be provided expeditiously in the military.
Yes, I know that there is referrals that can be given, but from my personal experience, it's not always easy. And I was personally told one time that it's because the military wants to take care of their own. But the way I see it is you're not taking care of your own if you're not helping for what that person needs. So I completely agree with that. And I think that that's something that could definitely be improved in the military. And now I'm always on this podcast trying to provide not only value, but also solutions so that when it gets to the point where the people that can make change at a higher level hear this, that they're also hearing solutions to the problems. And so I appreciate that little bit of insight as to making life better for service members. And Beth, thank you so much for just taking the time to be on the show and for sharing so much of your story. You have an incredible story. And I think that for multiple aspects, there's so many people that can relate to you in some way or another. And thank you for sharing that tidbit about Argentina, because I had no idea. Now I want to visit. It sounds like a beautiful place.
It is. And thank you, Rachel, so much for what you do for all of us. You might not think you touch a life, but I'm sure that you have. And thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate the chance. And, I look at this opportunity, to have survived cancer, especially cancer, as, I do need to pay it forward. And, if this helps, the proverbial, if it helps one person, I'm so happy. But, folks, just take care of yourself. Don't be so hard on yourself. And you have every right to live a life that's full of quality of life. So I want you to not just go through life. I want you to live your life.
Well, I can't think of any better way to end than that. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Muchas gracias y buenas noches.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen in today. Each week, I'll be bringing you value in the mental health space and its direct impact on service members and veterans. If you feel you personally got value today from this episode, it would mean the world to me if you would leave a 5-star rating and review and share this to your audience. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your mental health matters, and your story doesn't end here.